All right. Well, I am so excited, everyone. Today we have Paul here from PastureBird. And if you've not heard of PastureBird, I am the biggest fan because they are doing innovation that has, if it's never been done, I'm not aware of it. But man, you bring scale to a place that's very hard to scale. You're bringing innovation to a very stagnant niche. So I'm going to go ahead and let Paul introduce himself, a little bit about how he got started, and then we're going to dive into the big changes you are making in the ag world. So
Uh,
take it away, Paul.
that's a little overly generous, but I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here today, and definitely, yeah, stoked to share what we're working on, and also a lot of the areas for growth and opportunity and stuff that we've identified too. So
Yeah, tell us a little bit about how you became a farmer. How did you even get started here?
yeah, well, I didn't grow up on the farm at all. I grew up as a city kid, downtown Seattle. Played sports my whole life. After college, went into the Marine Corps, and during Scout Sniper School, actually in Virginia, not too far from where you're at, I contracted Lyme disease from a tick bite, of course, and pretty much started having some health issues from there, and learning about real food, and kind of went paleo and did that whole thing in about 2008. When I came back from Iraq, my family was all trying to just eat organic and pasture raised as much as possible, and we could find almost everything except for chicken. And we were really just impressed and sort of geeking out on this guy, again, not too far from you, Joel Salatin, in the Shenandoah Valley. And he was doing some really innovative stuff with mobile chicken coops. And, 99.999% of the chicken industry is stationary. And this idea of mobile livestock was just like instantly made sense to me, like um, moving animals around so that it's a benefit to them and the environment with their manure was just like very common sense. And I'd only heard that animals are bad for the environment. And so the best thing you can do as an environmentalist, which I always was just eat less meat, don't eat meat. And when I heard what he was saying, it was just different than anything I'd heard before. And so we started very small in our backyard, 50 birds just for family hobby. And 50 became today, which is just the largest pastured poultry operation in the world that we know of. And really, looking to grow a lot from here too. So I could talk all about that, but that's the story in a nutshell. So
Yeah, tell me about where you are now. I mean, you just keep expanding, expanding. What kind of acreage are you sitting on each of the farms? What's your scale right now?
yeah, so we're currently producing on 4 farms, all in Middle Georgia. We just recently shut down our last California footprint for PastureBird. That's largely just a cost and kind of water and labor situation there. We're trying to be our company mission with PastureBird is accessible and affordable pasture-raised chicken, and that doesn't combine super well with California,
I was about
unfortunately.
to say, is
So
California not the cheapest state? I can't imagine.
this is an amazing state. I'm a huge proponent of there is no bad place to farm, but you always have to do the SWOT analysis, which is like your strengths, weakness, opportunity, threat, and like large scale pasture poultry farming is just not something that made sense in Southern California where we are. So no shade at all on California ag. I think that there's huge opportunities here, just not with that. In Georgia, we had all these amazing use cases. We had guys doing hay production, and we had guys doing row cropping, and we had guys doing pasture and grazing cattle, and all these situations in the chicken belt where guys were like, man, if I could only take these hundreds of thousands of chickens that are sitting in my barn and get them on a mobile, like on wheels, and move them around these fields so I could wean myself off of synthetic fertilizer, wouldn't that be great? And we were kind of like, that's what we've been working on since 2017 down here in San Diego. So it was just a no brainer. We're probably on 500 or 600 acres right now, and that sounds like a fairly big number, but it's nothing in that part of the country. I mean, all it is row crop for like as far as you can drive. So we're a tiny little piece, but we've been really working hard on like this larger than a proof of concept, but not really full commercial viability just yet. And I think we're really ready to start ramping for real now. So it's an exciting time.
What would you say kind of the output is on that scale that you're on right now? Just what's your production value? Because it's not that you're producing a little on 500 acres, you're producing a lot. So,
Yeah, we're
what's
in
your
the
scale there?
single digit millions of chickens per year. Not thousands and not like tens of millions kind of thing. So we're kind of in that, you know, a small player in poultry is like in the industry is doing 200,000, 500,000, kind of a million birds a week typically. So we're a tiny, tiny little micro player within the industry, but we're like the next biggest pastured poultry operation doing, authentic pastured poultry at least. There's some fakers out there. We can talk about that later. But the next biggest that's really raising chickens on pasture is probably in like the 150,000 birds a year range. So we're huge for pasture raised and we're tiny, tiny, tiny for the industry. We're in this very like weird in between, but it's
Well,
cool. It's
that
fun.
just seems like crazy to me, right? Like, 'cause I'm used to backyard farming and I'm used to like 30 in a box Salatin style, and just to
Yep.
think like millions is kind of like crazy. So I think it's huge, but when we look at Purdue, we're like just a drop
It's
in the
all relative. I mean, it's
bucket.
very, very relative. And we designed our coops to house 6,000 birds each. So we took really the same principles of the Joel Salatin system, about a foot and a quarter per bird, in covered kind of interior space, if you will, or just covered protected space, with a floorless mobile coop. And instead of doing 80 birds or 100 birds or like 600, like a mobile range coop, if your listeners have heard of that kind of portable greenhouse system that gets pulled around on skids, we picked 6,000 because that was a number that typically fits on a semi truck. So we kind of try to build the whole thing so it would match up with what the industry is already doing, and we could fill up a semi truck that would go to the processing plant. So I mean, it's always funny is like if you're in this little micro backyard environment, you're like, semi truck, that sounds gross. And if you're in the industry, you're like, obviously, semi trucks are like the baseline of what we do. So we're always playing this a bit of like an in between, I guess. But I don't think of it as in between. I really think we took the principles of true pasture raised, daily move, mobile style farming and just applied them to a scale that the industry, even makes sense with. So
I think that's what I'm so attracted to is it just breathes small scale, but you brought such a scale to it. So it doesn't feel industrialized or like, it doesn't feel like it's just a box that moves. No, it has so much more to that. So I think that's really cool. If you want to lead us down that thought process, so obviously you were thinking, well, I'm learning to fit my industry. Like I'm gonna be big, and that's so cool. Tell me how you started from saying I'm gonna build a Joel Salatin to how you even got that. Like, how did you get to the first arc? That was amazing.
it kind of goes back to like our upbringing as a family. So I'm partnered with my two brothers-in-law and my father-in-law. None of us, on my wife's side or on my side, came up with like a lot of money or anything like that. So we weren't poor, but we weren't rich. We are just kind of right in the middle, and we're very busy sports families. So it was like for the first 3 years, 4 years really of the business, the family business, we were doing small scale, certified organic, slow growth breed, soy free, corn free, pickup site only, just the most like expensive and inconvenient product you can basically make. And it was like, I'm so proud of that. We actually still have that family business called Primal Pastures. I'm so proud of it. It's an amazing company. It's beautiful. But it was like 3 or 4 years in, you kind of like take inventory and you go, all right, we're producing a product that my parents would have never afforded or had access to.
Right.
And it's cool. Like I'm so stoked on what we're doing. It's the gold standard, right? But it was
There's a
like
place for gold, and then there's a place for silver bronze.
100%. Yeah. And it just felt like I said, the next kind of small industry player is this like 1.5 million birds a week, all stationary. But there's nobody in that like in between space anywhere trying to figure out how to really bring scale specifically to chicken. And again, we did the SWOT analysis. Being in Southern California, land is expensive, water's hard to come by. And so, like, as much as we all wanted to be regenerative cattle farmers or bison, it's just like not in the cards when you're poor and land is expensive,
And it
cattle
doesn't
farming is like
rain.
not really the smartest thing you can do. So,
Yeah.
um, we've like slowly gotten ourselves into cattle farming over the years, really just as like a lawnmower kind of thing. But chicken made a lot of sense for us. And then the other big thing was processing. So like everybody nationally, even internationally, actually complains about we don't have processing. Like we want to do chicken, but we don't have USDA processing. It's like chicken and the egg thing. Do we build our own? Do we harvest in the backyard? We harvested in the backyard for about 3 years. And then we found that we had this very unique, in the SWOT analysis, we would call it a strength, that there was a USDA processor that would let us in like only an hour from the farm.
There you go.
And most people don't have that, right? So it was
Right.
like, okay, so we have this great climate to do poultry year round, flat land, not necessarily a lot of water, but we need something with a high return because the land's really expensive around here. And we have this USDA processing. As much as we want to be, cattlemen and wear the big belt buckle and the hat, like I think chicken's probably our thing. So we just decided to focus on that. And that kind of combined with like, how do we make this more accessible and more affordable? There's certain things that are better at small scale. There's other things that just they don't. There's not necessarily better because it's small. So we started thinking about what would it look like to be an industry player, but instead of using stationary houses, use mobile houses. Like how would that look? Like what would that need to look like? And we dreamed um, between me and some of our early team members, was like, all right, let's build. What would it look like to put out 1 million chickens a week on pasture? Like we call it the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. Like
Yep.
someday, what would that look like? And even if we never get there,
Yep.
it's like that's where our sights were kind of set, And we started figuring out a coop setup and kind of this like integration. Like, would we have to build our own slaughterhouse and logistics and distribution and accounting and like all hatchery, feed mill, or would it make more sense to like partner with a company that already has all that stuff? So those are the kind of questions we started asking ourselves. What would the funding look like? What would the investors like? How do we do all that piece of it? So the context was 1 million chickens a week on pasture, and then it became like, how do we get there?
Yep. Well, so tell me how you got there then. So you say, I have this crazy idea, I have this vision. What, I guess, kind of high level, what was the testing like? Who was the first person who funded and kind of the specs? Because I'm just so nerdy. I like it's solar. What rate does it roll? Like I think that stuff's so cool.
Totally, yeah. So yeah, we can geek out on all this. So this is the more fun stuff to talk about
Yep.
anyways. We shared our vision with a guy who had recently been the poultry manager at White Oak Pastures and then at Cobb Creek Farms. Cobb Creek is the one that developed the mobile range coop, which is a really great intermediate scale system with kind of a 700 square foot, 600 bird system. Cobb Creek has the Polytex coop, which is really, really a great setup for the intermediate scale. So Dan became our ranch manager after having those two previous experiences. And where I'm kind of the guy that can figure out the money, I can pitch a vision, I can get investors to kind of put some money in and all that. He was the guy that was like, here's the welds we need, here's the motors we need, here's how we power it. I mean, he was like the boots on the ground, kind of hardcore engineer, if you will. He had a PhD in organic chemistry. He's just like this super, super smart guy.
Right. You gotta
And then
have
my
somebody who's
brother-in-law,
money smart,
Jeff,
and you gotta have somebody who's boots on the ground smart, right?
yeah, you do. And then my brother-in-law, Jeff, was like the very much like operations. So he was live management, bringing in chicks and feed and like getting birds out, getting birds to harvest all the time. So it was really a big team, not a big team. It was probably 10 of us, but like the three of those core people with their roles. And then it was really like starting in 2017, what would the coop of the future, if you will, what would it look like? Because we want to take the best from the pastured poultry world, which we really felt like was daily moves in these floorless mobile coops, that give you protection from predator and sun protection and feed and water, but then how do we take also the best from the industry? So that's like, we don't want to be feeding by buckets. We don't want to be, manually dumping a hose in. We don't want to be pulling these things by tractor or by hand or something like that. Like, how do we automate this process? There's a lot of stuff about the industry that I'm not super keen on, but then there's also amazing tech within the poultry industry. So, for example, the feed auger, which has been around for like 50 years, by the way, it's not cutting edge technology, but
Right.
in a conventional house, a silo, takes a bunch of thousands of pounds of feed and it takes it through an auger and it deploys it out to all these feed pans automatically.
Oh,
It's like a modern marvel, but it's been around for a long time. So it's like, all
yeah.
right, how do we take that? Nipple waterers, instead of filling up individual bell waters, like how do we take a pressurized line and run it out to like enough water nipples for 6,000 birds. So we pretty much try to take the best stuff that we could. Thermostatic controls is another huge one.
Yeah.
So it's like, even on pasture, what can we do with thermostatic controls to have the curtains go up and down automatically based on the temperature, have the fans kick on automatically, the movement. It's like we were so used to breaking our backs pulling these, not stupid, but
Simple.
very difficult, challenging, a
Yeah.
number of times like my chain or rope broke and I ended up flat on my back, like cursing,
Yeah.
um, it was too many to count. So it's like, how do we automate the movement, which is this rad problem, because if we're moving 6,000 birds every day, we can invest a lot more in the motors, in the kind of wheels, and slow that movement down a lot compared to like in the tractor pull system. We were moving about 70 MRCs at one point, every single day, and filling them up by hand, by buckets, So it's like when you go into a 6,000 bird system, you can really afford to slow that move down and automate it with all this cool gadgetry and tech. So we started putting electric motors on this huge 150 by 50 foot, essentially modified greenhouse frame. And I remember, like, even back in 2017, just the first time Dan showed us, he's like, hey, watch, he's running off a generator and it's like really janky. There's no covering, there's no birds in it. But we were like pushing this button and this giant steel structure was driving itself to a fresh spot. And we're like, this is it. This is
There we go.
so cool,
That's awesome.
But yeah, it was like these fun little moments that we'll never forget, going back. And I don't know that we need to make it a lot bigger. Like 6,000 is a great number because that's what goes on a truck anyways. So
Yeah.
I think we're kind of at the size that we love. And a lot of the tech, like, it's funny, early on, the iterations, every coupe you make looks vastly different. And then like as the design gets better and better, it's like we're just making these either no tweaks or really small tweaks that like you wouldn't even notice, being kind of a chicken nerd. Like you'd be like, oh, it's pretty much the same coupe.
Yeah.
So that's how I think that's how your design's getting more solid, is that the tweaks get like smaller each time.
Yeah, well, and the sanity fits every single time. Like they don't need to move fast because guess what? Chickens don't move fast when they're, they
Exactly.
can just slowly
It's actually
slide
better to move
forward.
slow. Yeah.
Yeah, or you run over the tiny cute chickens that you want to eat
Yep.
later. So,
Yep.
yeah.
So we would
So,
move in the MRC, the mobile range coupe, which again is like the 600 bird system. Because we're pulling by tractor, we would move 36 feet in about 30 seconds. And that's fine. You're kind of like scaring the birds. We call it scaring, but you're just kind of encouraging the birds up to the front with a person standing in the back with like paddles so that they don't run anything over. And it's not a bad system. It's just we knew there was room for improvement with that.
yeah,
Now with the automated system, because we're moving so many, it's automated. We don't have to pull a bunch of these by tractor. We just hit a button or even a timer and the thing just drives itself.
right.
So now 36 bird or 36 feet in 30 seconds was the MRC. Now we're moving 50 feet in 7 minutes. So this thing is moving so slow that you can't even really see it.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's
a
like
crawl on
the
video.
speed of chicken. So we don't have to worry about running birds over, any of that stuff. It's a much more like species appropriate movement rate. And it's rad to be around, but every time I post videos, I'm like, I have to put it in like 20x speed. Otherwise, it's the most boring video you've ever seen in your life.
Well, I was about to say I'll nerd out with you because I just feel like it, when you do it in person, and I think that's what gives that deep appreciation of the pulling and falling, or the chicken doesn't want to move. Just one of them doesn't want to go with you that day. And then you have to kind of sort them out and say, no, no, come on, you won monster. And I think
Totally.
there's so much like when you get to be hands-on and see that, you get to say, well, what does fit? Like it doesn't fit for some human to say, get on, little doggies. They're not dogs. They're chickens
They're
and they
not.
just want to be
No.
slowly moved. So I think it's so innovative. And then you added solar to add on to it. And then you added technology that was already there. Like it just makes so much sense to
Well, the
me.
solar was by necessity. It wasn't like everybody's like, oh, cool, you guys are like these green hippies, solar, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like,
I think anybody
not
who
really. I
like
mean, we're
lives
just
in
out in the
rural
middle of
America, there's no
nowhere. So
energy,
it's like
right?
I don't have a power drop
Right.
in the middle of a field or something like that. So solar was the only way that we could
Well, also, are you going
really
to
get
plug in the
power out.
thing that's walking away from the power? I see that as a short window, right? Like, go plug it into the
100%.
next one down the road. Like, that doesn't make sense. So
Yep, exactly.
yeah. So I think rural innovation, like you kind of get stuck with, let's just say there is nothing around how you innovate it. And I feel like yours is as darn close as it gets at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much innovation at the small scale with pastured poultry. I mean, you Google mobile coop and you're gonna see like 50 designs,
Yeah.
and so lots of people have tried to crack the code. I think the big innovation in addition to the coop was like the business model piece of this. So it was like it's going to cost us $50 million to build a hatchery, a slaughterhouse, and a feed mill minimum,
Right.
like probably more. And I don't even like that part of the business. It feels like a part of the business that's already really innovated. It's very tech heavy. I mean, there's a ton that's already happened there. So the best I can do is maybe go out and try to build something similar to what already exists.
Right.
So it just didn't feel like a good, like from a return on investment, if you're thinking about it like an investor, like asking them to put money in, we're just gonna go build another feed mill. I don't know.
Right.
Like, is that really a smart thing to do? Or you go find somebody. So even in 2015, our goal became let's build something that is a bolt-on to an existing poultry company.
Right.
I don't know who it is. I don't know who it's going to be.
Right.
We had a few ideas for like there was a couple of companies already in California because that was sort of our context. It was like we didn't have any relationship there, anything. We're just like let's build something that would become interesting as a bolt-on to an existing business, and that in and of itself was a hard decision because it's like coming up in this space, you probably know and we even thought this way, like big ag is the devil. I mean, that's sort of the pervasive, what's in the back of your mind if you
Yeah.
came up as a barefoot farmer, which we did. And it's like, that's what everybody says. And you just sort of believe it because that's what people say. So um, that was sort of our context. So even deciding that let's build a business with the goal of really putting it in the hands of a big company, that was like a huge decision for me and our family and everybody else. And there was a ton of intentionality about doing that, and it felt like you're sort of making a deal with the devil in the beginning. And it's like, are we really going to do this, and a lot of people criticized us because they're like, oh, you guys are just in it for the money or whatever. But really, like, it truly wasn't that, and I didn't feel the need to argue with anybody. But deep down it was like, if you want to move the needle, we need grassroots, a million small farms. It's a beautiful vision, and I want to see that as much as anybody. But if I want to see the needle moved in time for like my kids, I really think we need both. You need a million small farms, but you need big ag to see that there's another way to do things too. And there was a lot of interest there pretty early on from the big ag, if that's what you want to call them. And it was just like anything, we all have these preconceived notions. You get in, you think everybody's going to be Satan worshippers and like, just these horrible,
Yeah.
disgusting capitalists.
Terrible
And
the
it's
whole
like
way
you get
through.
in and they're honestly some of the most genuine, nice, like hardworking, rural people that you've ever met. I mean, I'm sure there's some bad ones too, but it's like we started to kind of realize, you know what, these are just regular people. And what they've really done is they've responded to the demand for cheap chicken.
Yep.
And it's
Yep.
like that's what people asked for the last 50 years. I think they did a pretty darn good job producing that. And so now that people are asking for something different. They're asking for something that's better for their bodies and better for the land. Like, guess what? They want to give people the products that they're asking for.
Huh.
And I started to feel pretty good about that. And we started talking to Purdue Farms back in about 2018. It was sort of a happenstance thing. Like some people from their team found out about what we were doing, came out for a farm tour. We were really excited to show them. There was no talk about doing any kind of a deal, although that's always like in the back of your head.
All right.
We didn't really know Purdue because we're like West Coast guys. Purdue doesn't have a huge footprint on the West Coast. So it was like, let's get to know them. Um, Radio silence for like 6 months after the farm tour. We were honestly very concerned that like they were going to come in and just steal our ideas.
That's literally
We're
what I'm
tiny,
thinking,
right?
like there it goes.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, it's like, well, we're going to kind of shoot our shot.
Yeah.
Um, so they come back 6 months later. They're like, hey, this is really interesting. We want to learn more. We kind of got to know them and their executive team and a lot of the stuff that they were up to. One of the really reassuring things is they were like, Purdue specifically was the first to really do certified organic chicken at scale. They were the first to do no antibiotics ever and to like fully remove antibiotics from the program. They purchased Nyman Ranch, which in my opinion was really the best gold standard national pork operation that treated farmers really well. It's not pasture raised, it's not regenerative, but they don't pretend that it is. And I really respect that. They're trying to do the best tasting pork, outdoor access, deep bedded pens, like a really solid brand, transparent, all that. I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. They've been around for 10 years. A lot of the same people are there since the beginning. Panorama grass fed beef, they partnered with them in like 2020. So there was all these markers that like, if we are going to work with Big Ag, we want it to be the best of the best. And after about a year and a half of, we call it like the dating period, we decided to officially kind of partner up with them, and we became one of the Purdue companies. And I'm still working, technically for Purdue, but I consider it like working with Purdue to help really bring an authentic version of pasture raised to the market. And it's like got its challenges. A huge company, things do sort of move slow, but what I can say for Purdue is obviously nothing but like 100% integrity. What we've produced pre-Purdue is only, the quality has only increased, the standards have only increased and formalized. I'm just as proud, if not more proud, of like what we're producing today than we were 5 years ago. And it's the real thing. I mean, we are moving birds to fresh pasture every single day, and that's backed up by in-person farm tours and live streams and products that are going to the market, and they're starting to be offered like an accessible price, which is like super exciting.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the biggest criticisms of regenerative ag too, right? It's so exciting, it's so amazing, the cost, the cost, the cost, the cost. And we come back to that dichotomy of farmers deserve to be paid for amazing food. We all
Yeah,
can't argue with that. And then we all say, well, my bank account has this many dollars in it because
totally.
it's the world. The world's tough. There's just never enough money, no matter which inflation, recession, nonsense, pandemic, whatever you're in, there just tends to not be enough money. So I think there is just this huge gap for innovation to bring that middle ground. And like you said before, you can have a gold standard, a bronze, a silver, and all those things are so important along the way to make those. And like you said, as long as you're holding a standard that, like, especially when you're health based, right? That I have a standard that I believe in, and you can hold that through Purdue. Like, that's the relationships that matter. That's how you make those agreements that work out.
Yeah, it was one of the first things we did. So I was really concerned about this, right? Because even with all the due diligence we did, it's like, are we gonna essentially give them our baby that we've been working on for 10 years,
Right.
and they're just gonna take it, steal our brand, and like go do, conventional chicken and slap our name on it,
Right.
like that was the big
Yeah.
fear. And I had every sense and confidence that wasn't going to happen. But the first thing that we did when we got in was we established our own definition and standard protocol for what is pasture raised and what is not,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where we didn't really have to do that, being independent, because it's like, look, it's my word, you should trust me. I'm Farmer Paul, blah, blah. Like,
Yeah.
now
A
you're
whole
going into
different
retail and you're going to the
one-on-one
stores, like
to,
nobody knows
yeah.
me that's buying, like definitely not personally. They
Right.
don't know me. So that only goes so far. So it became, we defined pasture raised poultry as the majority of every animal's life has to be on pasture.
Right.
People say, well, why the majority? And if you know chickens at all, like they have to be in the brooder for a little bit first.
Right.
So 2-3 weeks they have to be in the, like a climate control. They can't go straight out to an open field environment. But the majority, so 51% minimum of their life has to be on pasture. And we created this, what we call a flock calculator. So every single flock has to get every day of their life marked out on this graph. They get an X for days that they were not on pasture, which would be like a brooder day or a day where the weather's so bad we couldn't move them to a fresh spot or something like that, because that happens, as you know.
Yeah.
And then they get a check mark for days that 24 hours every single bird was on pasture. And if those checks don't add up to 51% or more of that animal's life, that's fine. It's just not going to be a pasture raised product within PastureBird and Purdue. And I'm like, that's the gold standard. I mean, that's like very clear. It's very understandable. It's pass fail. There's not like an exemption for seasonality. There's not like an access, a lot of the nastiness in pasture races. Oh, they had access to pasture.
Right.
That doesn't mean
No.
squat,
Not
You can
anymore.
open up a tiny little 2-foot door. And this is what happens, really. You open up a tiny little door and, oh yeah, my 20,000 birds had access to go
They,
500 feet away and go frolic in the pasture.
or they
And we
could
even
see
have
the
these.
light over the head of the 20,000 other chickens, right? Like
Yeah,
they
yeah,
saw a
good luck.
daylight, that counts. No.
And by the way, their food, water, shade, and protection are all inside of that house,
Right, that
right?
they never
So
actually
they ain't
left.
going out there.
Yeah.
If they do, they're popping their head out for a few seconds and coming back in. So,
Right, right.
but of course, like all the marketing is, we're gonna grab a few of these birds, we're gonna stick them out there on the perfect spring day and make it look
Right.
like,
Yeah.
but that was not what we were gonna do. And I just, I wanted a very clear, understandable like standard for PastureBird chicken being part of a big company. And so we established that really from like day one, and we haven't changed it. So I feel really good about everything that we're putting out. The hard thing is it sounds really scalable, to the backyard sort of small farm community, but from like a big ag perspective, it's not that scalable because every increase that we want to do, if we want to grow, another 10,000 birds a week, it's not like you can just go out and take existing chicken houses and land that's already there, slap organic feed in there and put a new brand on it or something. It's like we have to literally build every coop from scratch, go find land, convert it to pasture and add it. So it's like incredibly not scalable from the sort of industry perspective.
Yeah. But I think, the small farmers get to see an opportunity. So maybe this is even a better opportunity for the small people to move into big ag space rather than back down. Because I think we're at that cute revolution pinch point where like small is a little too small, big is a little too big. And then all
Yeah.
of a sudden there was this gap that widened in the middle. So maybe people can
Or
move
there's
up.
just, I mean, there's 9 billion chickens a year harvested for meat in the US alone.
Right.
I think there's room for small guys and medium guys and big guys to play in this space. We had a lot of, I shouldn't say that. We had a half dozen kind of existing pasture poultry farmers that were very nervous when we started talking to Purdue. And they said, well, you're just going to eat up the whole pasture poultry market and I'm going to have no customers anymore.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't predict the future. I just don't see that happening. What you have to offer with a direct relationship, you have breed and feed, you have local, you have all these different things to offer that I don't have. And I don't think that I'm really selling to your customer either. I'm trying to displace, free range guys, organic guys. I'm trying to like break into that large scale grocery store format and break into some of those guys. I'm not trying to consolidate and take out a bunch of small guys at farmers markets and direct ship and pickup points and all that stuff. And
No.
I've even had lots of these conversations in grocery, where there is like a really cool small brand in there, pasture poultry brand. And we always say like, that's not who we're trying to replace, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even want to talk, like if you already have a rad small local program, like keep that,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going after the other, the bigger guys. So like, let me kind of take that on. But I think that was, I'm not going to say a huge concern, but it was a concern of some folks. And so far, I really think that it's shown. I mean, this is a huge, huge, huge space. 9 billion birds a year. I mean, we're talking about 1 million, 2 million on pasture.
Yeah.
We've got a long ways to go before we're even
There can
1% of
be
the
15 more
industry.
pasture birds and we're still drops in the bucket, right? Like
Exactly.
so,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. I think there's so many different opportunities for scale. So on that, what are kind of some things you're looking down the road, bigger projects? Where are you headed? Because scale is needed, right? I'll go back to the kids for a second, right? If what's the statistic? If we return half of U.S. farmland to regenerative, we can fix the climate change. We can do all these things.
Yeah.
So we need to accelerate and we need to be impactful. How do you see those changes moving forward? Because you're doing a lot of innovative side projects too
Yeah.
that we can talk about those specifically or not, depending on where you are with those.
There's like two answers come to my mind on that, but they're kind of connected. So one is not everybody wants to be the farmer, the processor, the marketer, and the distributor. Like we get calls from people all the time that are like, I don't want to do all. I want to grow.
Well, it's
I
a
want to grow
lot of
chickens.
work. Yeah.
I want to be the guy that grows chickens, and you pick them up and bring them to the slaughterhouse, and you distribute them for me. Like, let me just be on the farm and be good at that part of it.
Yeah. Well,
So I think that
that's a
that's
job in
part of it.
itself,
Like,
right? Like
It's a
that
huge
in
job.
itself.
Yeah, and we're all, inherently maybe a little scared of specialization, and there's this very romantic vision of the farmer who's like doing the farmer's market and processing the birds by himself and doing the marketing himself and doing the social media himself and doing the distribution himself. And it's like, I've seen legitimately dozens and dozens, if not hundred, of those guys go out of business.
Well, it's
And they're
exhausting,
amazing people, and
but
their
burnout, man.
families are failing,
Yeah.
and they aren't making money, and it's just brutal, And I'm not saying it can't be done, but the number of times where I've seen it not work is concerning. Let's
Yeah.
put it that way,
Yeah.
We all look to Joel Salatin and Will Harris as these like beacons of truth and the true north, and it's like it's a beautiful model that they have, but it's not for everybody,
Well, and they're going to tell you it's not for everybody. They're going to tell you it's, decades in the making and it was not one family. Because I think that's tough, right? You see a lot of couples with small kids and they do it and they nail it. And then like years add on and it's so much over lifetime. So I feel
Yeah,
like, the ability to work together, it doesn't have to be Purdue,
yeah,
but something else that allows you to just even like take, if like you could offset the marketing of your farm business, like, well,
totally.
people pay marketers 100,000 a year because it's a very serious job. Like, you can't do all that. So
And there's lots of examples of that. I mean, we're not the only one. Like Gray's Cart
yeah,
came out of Seven Sons Farm in Indiana. Amazing family, amazing farm. And they're like, you know what? We shouldn't have a million people out there making their own website and software. Like that just doesn't make sense. So I feel like that's an example on the back end or the software side where it's like, yeah, Gray's Cart saw a problem, they identified it. Let's all like work together on something, and then you can say a little more specialized. The other thing I was going to loop in though was like this idea of kind of crop animal integration is just it's everything to me. It's like the future slash the past of farming, right?
yeah,
And the fact that we've segregated the two so much is really sad, but there's so much opportunity in the farm that can figure out how to, have plants feed animals and animals feed plants. Whether that's perfectly circular, and like the dream of mine is to eventually grow our own corn and beans for the chickens on the same farms. Like that's super cool, but also we're on a former wheat field right now in Georgia, 200 acres of wheat, and it started out as just this little wheat stubble, and we put, it was rough, it was like really rough, and we put birds out there, and we're about 2 years in on that now, and I posted a video recently, but it's like starting to look like grass, and actually there's so much grass now we're bringing in cattle, and after a few years on that spot, we could bring in wheat again to this very like healed state with probably 2 times the organic matter, maybe even 3 times. There's an example on another one of our partner farms in also in middle Georgia. The guy was growing hay on about 400 acres for probably 200 head of cattle, something like that. And he was growing and cutting hay all the time. Well, he was using a lot of synthetic fertilizer because it's Georgia and like you just don't maintain a lot of nutrients in the soil. And he was always trying to figure out how could I pull, the manure out of my conventional houses? Because he was a long-term Purdue guy. He's
mm-mm.
like, how do I pull that manure out and spread it onto the field and do it at the right rate and all this stuff? And by the way, at the same time, his daughter, who farm, had to take like an off-farm job and become a teacher and all this stuff. And it was like not a bummer. It's just the way it is. I mean, if you're anywhere in a rural area, these are the stories that we hear all the time of people that like want to stay on farm. There's just not enough to go around. Um, but he was the first one to sign up for Purdue's like pastured poultry program, and he was first in line. He's an awesome guy, just a legit poultry farmer. He wanted to do actually mobile coops himself originally, and Purdue came out and they said, "Hey, we have this pretty cool thing we're working on. Are you interested in being like one of the first to do it?" And he was like, "Sign me up! I want to do it."
Yeah.
Um, After only about a year running pastured poultry on his hayfield, he was able to completely wean off of synthetic fertilizer, which A is like a huge cost savings,
Right.
but B, I mean, now he's making money on pastured poultry, his hay, his cattle, and his conventional poultry. And it looks like maybe the daughter can come back and work on the farm now too, because there's just more money to go around. So
Yeah.
it's not without its challenges, but it's like, gosh, there's these beautiful synergies
Yeah.
that happen between plants and animals that just feel like creation to me. It feels like the the way that the whole thing was created in the first place. So it's like very exciting. You know, you can call it ag tech, but it's really more like biomimicry tech is more how I think of it, as like, let's look at creation and let's try to model systems based on that more than always trying to just be smarter than nature and slamming a square peg in a round hole, and
Yeah.
fighting nature all the time. So it's just a fun way to farm,
Yeah.
in line with nature as much as possible.
And I think that goes back to, again, like the small farmer has that opportunity to try those things. Because when you're a big guy and you want to try something and you've never done it before, your failure rate is probably pretty darn high, as trying new things tends to
Yeah,
not have a perfect blueprint. And you have to risk the farm, the mortgage payment, the everything to try something new. Well, if we can just try new stuff and innovate at that small scale and push up through it, it's not so scary. We don't have to do, look, this is proven
definitely.
well on the small scale. Let's do 10 acres. Let's do 100 acres. Let's move forward. And again, that's why I feel like you're not a threat to the little guy. It's an empowerment of, look what you can do when you take small scale and just think it through and think expansion and get funding, because funding is not the enemy. And that, I think that's also a tough space, which you've probably been highly criticized, is to take venture capital funding. Oh, you're selling out to the devil with you. It's over. Well, if we're using that money for good, isn't that a whole lot better than investing it in more terrible systems, more systems that are not saving our future? I mean, call me glass half full, but
Yeah, but what's the alternative, right? I mean, these guys are gonna be writing their checks one way or another. And not that I'm like the guy or something, but don't we want people that are thinking about regeneration and biomimicry to be the ones that have the money? Like,
yeah.
don't we want that, when
Don't we
we
want the money in the
uh
hands of the people doing good? I don't know, crazy.
yeah, I mean, when we sold PastureBird, it wasn't like, it's some kind of like an insane amount of money, but it was like enough where the first thing that me and my family did was we'd only leased farms before. That's all we could ever afford. We didn't have money. So literally the first thing that we did with a big chunk of the money that we got from selling was we bought, our agroforestry project. We bought 30 acres really close to town in this like semi-urban environment to do a really rad certified organic U-pick with like animal integration. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, I think that we want money in the hands of people that are going to do rad stuff, or at least try to do rad stuff. And money is not it's the Bible says it's not the love of money that's evil, or the root of all evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. And it's like, if we're using our money responsibly and we're like deploying it in a way that's hopefully helping our local community and the planet, that's rad. We shouldn't look at money as this like nasty negative thing always.
Yeah, it's a tool, right? It's another tool in the toolbox, as much as water, animal integration. It's another tool in the
Totally.
system. And that's why I think like this conversation about scale and integration, it doesn't have to be threatening. It is not the enemy of small scale farmers. It is another tool to small scale farmers and moving forward. So I love that.
Totally.
Wow. So any dreams and aspirations, final words of where you're going in the crazy expansion?
Um, I mean, I just hope that we can make a lot of pasture poultry farmers. Like, I really see the market, especially down in Georgia, with folks that run row crops. Um, this just makes so much sense, right? I mean, take your wheat and soybean and cotton rotation, and these guys are usually typically planting on some kind of rotation. Instead of pulling out your wheat and putting in, alfalfa, or instead of putting in cotton or something like that, take that 3 years, put it into pasture, like a cover crop, run poultry on it, get paid for those 3 years, potentially even, by the way, transition it to certified organic during that time,
Right.
then move your chickens to the next 100 acres or 200 acres and put your wheat or your soybeans or your cotton in behind that. It's like, work the animals into the rotation, and you don't have to like totally change a farm. It's just thinking about livestock as one of the rotations. And this is not a new idea. I mean, you go back thousands of years, look at any of the kind of indigenous farming systems, and they almost always incorporate livestock and plants together, whether that be cattle or bison or, geese or ducks. I mean, there's so many fish, right, in
Yeah.
China. Like, there's so many examples of plants and animals supporting each other in this symbiotic relationship. It's like, It's just not a new idea, and it's fun to like parlay that idea or layer on that idea onto medium to large scale like poultry farming. But we're in the golden age of regenerative right now. I really always say I feel like we're, building computers like in our garages like they were in the 80s. Like we're very much on the cusp of this thing like taking off. And so I just think it's an amazing time to jump in. I do kind of I don't chuckle, but I think a lot of the smartest talent that we have in our country saw the plant-based space as like this is where food needs to go. And a lot of our MITs and Harvards and just our very, very smart people, they kind of flock towards plant-based for like the last 5 years. And now that plant-based really, I mean, it's waving its white flag. Like it's not going to do what people thought it was, whatever you believe. I mean, it's not going to be what people maybe thought it was 2 years ago. Um, I'm really interested to see if some of those people, because we need the best and brightest figuring out plant and animal regenerative solutions. So like, do we get some of those really insanely smart people to come back to animal ag potentially and like figure out scalable solutions? Because we're just one. I mean, there's a million possibilities out there. So it's like, I can't wait to see kind of what develops out of this next maybe decade of innovation. And I think part of it's tech. I think part of it's just mindset. Part of it's like, how do we even set up our businesses? Like, I don't know if you follow Reggie at all with Tree Range Farms, but I think he's doing some really cool stuff with just the community aspect and how he's actually setting up community ownership and making sure there's vested interest at different levels. So like, there's so much room for improvement. I get people all the time like, hey, what are you doing to innovate on your feed? Because in chicken, we use a lot of corn and soybeans. Like that's a huge part of producing chicken. And it's one of the reasons why I don't really like saying that we're regenerative. It's like we do some things regenerative. We definitely do. I mean, I could show you land before and after, but I hesitate to really call it regenerative until we've really figured out how to do regenerative corn and soybeans at scale. And I don't know that that's totally figured out yet. So there's just so many opportunities throughout the supply chain, and I can't wait to see. We're not going to do all of them. We're not going to do most of them. So it's
Right.
like I can't wait to
I
see
took my big chunk
what the
here and
next
I
things
worked 10
are.
years on it, right? Like somebody else can take the other parts. So
Yeah, look what I really did. I mean, even on brooding, like we found that brooding after 10 years of trying to figure out what's the perfect brooder, right? Like we use greenhouses, we use containers, we use like so many different things. After it was all said and done, we're like, you know what the perfect brooder is? It's a conventional chicken house. Like it's got climate control, it's got bedding, it's got ventilation, it's got feed, it's got everything you need to like give a little baby chick the perfect life for the first 2 weeks, and then you bring them out to pasture. So the innovation that we've really figured out is from 2 weeks to 6 weeks or 7 week, whatever kind of your harvest timeline is. So like after all this is said and done, like we basically figured out a better way to do 4 weeks of this chicken's life. So like how many more things and opportunities are out there in ag right now that can be kind of reimagined, rethought through the lens of like biomimicry. I can't wait to see what comes out.
yeah. And I think a super important takeaway on that point is not how can I fix every single thing in the supply chain? How can I fix one component and focus really? Because like you said, I can't be the marketer, the harvester, the baby raiser, I can't be everything, but how could one giant step forward really make a massive impact rather than 10,000
Well,
small
you
baby
can.
steps?
I mean, you can do it. You can try.
Well,
And
it's going to be a
some
short
people
lifespan.
are more talented than I am, and it seems like they eke out a living basically doing it all.
Yeah.
Um, my good friends, the Shields Pastured Life Farm in Florida, they essentially do everything, and it's beautiful. I think it's that traditional, large family. They have a bunch of kids, which helps. But they have figured out how to do really the whole thing, and it's amazing. But I don't think that's how we all have to think about this. I think that's my point. That's not the only model. Um, and if it's almost like the larger you want to make it, the more focused that you have to be. I mean, for the first 3 years of our business, we did chicken, lamb, or first of all, meat, chickens, and layers, lamb, beef, pork, and honey. And it's like, you got to be careful because you can easily become kind of, jack of all trades, master of none, slash, you just suck at everything. That's the better way to say it,
I like
And we
it.
sucked at all of it.
Yeah.
And I think by, at least for our skill set, like focusing on meat chicken specifically, it paid dividends. I think we're going to leave a mark on the industry that's like meaningful and impactful now. And that's largely due to what you just said, which is like focus is good sometimes. It's not always bad to specialize.
I love it. Well, I will drop some links down in the comments. So if anybody wants to buy PastureBird directly, they can buy it direct. And also, of course, always support the small farmers with the gold standard, the bronze standard, and the silver. Like, got to get everybody. But thank you, Paul. I appreciate it so much. This has been amazing.
Yeah, we always say, like, if you want to support us, buy it from a local pastured poultry farm, first, if that's available and you can do it. Like, that's where we want you to go. That's what we want you to do. Like, that really is the more resilient future, is a million small farms, and buying from your backyard is where it's at. And we actually have a link for that. You can put it in your thing. It's getrealchicken.com.
Nice.
That is one of the best clearinghouses for finding a local farmer near you that's doing pasture raised. I think we fill in a lot of those gaps for people that don't have it, or the reality is a lot of people just have to go, they shop at the grocery store. Like, we're a soccer family. We have 4 kids playing sports. Even I end up buying my own product from our grocery store sometimes because I'm like, crap, I need something for dinner. And I don't have time to go order it and wait like 5 days for it to ship. So I'm just going to go to the grocery store and pick it up fresh. So I think we desire to kind of exist in that space, but by all means, when you can, like, definitely support local, small, but keep it pasture raised, because there's some knuckleheads that are just because it's local and small doesn't always mean it's great either.
So important. I think that's know your farmer, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's been awesome.
Thanks for having me on.